The second crucial ingredient is the use of experiments in science. Without experiments, theory remains meaningless and sterile. It's experimentation that allows theory to be held up against the real world. It gives it physical meaning. But whereas sophisticated mathematics grew out of the empire's obsession with the world's learning through the translation movement, practical experiments came from the daily needs of a powerful and expanding civilization. The driving force of the expanding medieval Islamic empire was trade. It boomed from around 700 AD onwards, creating a massive demand for metal workers, glass blowers, tile makers, craftsmen of every possible kind. When this collided with scholarly tradition, symbolized by the translation movement, it had seismic consequences for science.
The sciences absolutely depend, astronomy is a wonderful example, chemistry is another, on really intense relationships between craft traditions of instrument making, of working with metal and fire, of working with medicines, drugs, plants, and scholarship, highly sophisticated literary and mathematical analysis. And the Islamic world is just such a place.
By around 800 AD, the great cities of the Islamic Empire dominated the world's trade. To its markets came silks, spices, drugs, fruit, perfumes and gold, from as far afield as India and China in the east and Spain in the west. Anything that could be traded was. A wonderful relic of this medieval trade boom are the great caravanserais, like this one in the Syrian capital, Damascus. This huge vaulted building was designed as a resting place for all the traders and their animals who visited the city. On their ground floors were wide spaces for animals and goods. And above, there were rooms for the rich merchants to refresh themselves before another day of haggling. One 10th century traveller talks of the riches and beauties of the bazaars, and that the income of the provinces and localities was between 700 and 800 million dinars. Markets like this in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, still capture the intensity of medieval trade. And still surviving in the modern world of the internet and the mobile phone is a fantastic example of how traders 1,000 years ago communicated across a vast empire. So this is a carrier pigeon, its base is here, so wherever you took this pigeon all over Egypt, it will make its way back to this guy. There's a famous story that a rich Cairo merchant by the name of Anor wanted to grow cherry trees. So he sent a message with a carrier pigeon to a contact of his in Damascus asking for some seeds. His contact sent back 500 birds, each one carrying a small bag with seeds in it. The whole process took just 3 days. Sort of a medieval FedEx, really. By 700 AD, the Islamic Empire was taking the first steps towards mass production. And in this world where knowledge of materials, metals, and how they're worked became increasingly important, one practice flourished. It's the practice that was inextricably linked with magic. Specifically, the dream to turn base metals into gold. The mysterious practice of alchemy. The ancient art of alchemy was a mystical system of belief based on spells, symbols, and magic. But I believe it took Islamic scholars to turn this quasi-religion into something much more scientific: chemistry. Increasingly, the knowledge of the alchemists found more and more practical applications. For instance, when, during the last decade of the 7th century, the ruler of the Islamic Empire, Abd al-Malik, made the bold decision to create a common currency for all his dominions, he turned to alchemists for help.
The proportion of gold to other alloyed metals that you have to put into the dinar to make the dinar usable. Otherwise, pure gold will become very soft and you can't use it. So that proportion is adjusted by, believe it or not, in this period, the alchemists. It is the alchemists who knew how to combine metals together and how to get the proportions of this gold to silver and gold to bronze and so on.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, Nasser. Kayf al-hal? I hunted down tangible evidence of the skill of medieval Islamic alchemists in the old markets in the Syrian capital, Damascus.
This is an Islamic dinar. The date of this is 128 after Hijri.
So the middle of the 8th century, almost 740s.
Yeah, in the middle of the...
This 1,300-year-old coin, made of an alloy of different metals, isn't just durable. It's also malleable enough to be inscribed with intricate Arabic writing.
No God instead of Allah.
Coin making is one of the many examples of how the practical needs of a booming economy began to turn the magical practice of alchemy into modern chemistry. What's striking about chemistry in the medieval Islamic world is the sheer quantity of manuscripts that deal with the subject. There are literally thousands that survive, dealing with subjects as varied as metallurgy, glass making, tile making, dyeing, perfumery, weaponry. There's even a description on how to distill alcohol. All this activity clearly points to a bustling economy, with consumers, soldiers, engineers, architects, all demanding innovation and all demanding new technology. A great example of applied chemistry in the medieval Islamic world was the manufacture of soap. This stuff, solid soap that you can really clean yourself with, was virtually unknown in Northern Europe until the 13th century, when it started being imported from Islamic Spain and North Africa. By that time, the manufacture of soap in the Islamic world had become virtually industrialized. The town of Fez boasted some 27 different soap makers. And cities like Nablus, Damascus, and of course Aleppo became world-renowned for the quality of their soaps. A 12th century document has the world's first detailed description of how to make soap. It mentions a key ingredient, and it's a substance that became crucial to modern chemistry, an alkali. Now, alkaline substances are crucial to soap making. But what's interesting is that our word alkali derives from the Arabic al-qali, which means ashes. That's because back then, alkalis were manufactured from the ashes of the roots of certain plants like saltworts. Islamic chemists' new understanding of alkalis and other new chemicals gave another industry a lift too: glass making. The Islamic chemists discovered that they could change the color of glass using newly discovered chemicals like manganese salts. And they built industrial furnaces, some several stories high, to manufacture glass in huge quantities. The legacy of their skills can still be seen in beautiful stained glass windows. Islamic chemists also developed many other colors, pigments and dyes, using their new alkalis and metals like lead and tin. These helped architects to decorate mosques like this one in the Iranian city of Isfahan in a glorious range of colours and designs. Chemistry was also driven by the booming market in perfumes. In the main market in Damascus, traders still make up your favourite scent as they would have 1,000 years ago.
So it basically has a base of alcohol, and then he adds to it the oils from the plants that you want. Jasmine and rose water and mint. But these days they'll use very nice. Yeah, I think I'll buy some of that.
Perfumiers pushed chemists to come up with ever more ingenious techniques for extracting subtle and fragile fragrances from flowers and plants. They responded by refining and really establishing a technique that all chemists would instantly recognize today: distillation.
Many of the techniques originate with Islamic scholars or even earlier.
Dr. Andrea Sella, a chemist from the University College London, shows me how distillation was used.
Distillations would have been done in devices sort of related to these. This is what's now called a retort, and we don't really use them anymore, but retort comes from the word to bend. In other words, a flask which has been bent over, and that's crucial. Well, many of the techniques...
The shape means that a gas produced in the flask is forced to condense in the spout, and it's the main way of extracting scents from flowers and plants.
Now, the idea here is that you heat at this end and you collect at the other. And so we should actually take a look and see if we can do a quick distillation with rose petals. First, we need to just put in a little bit of water. The water and steam will essentially control the temperature. What we don't want is for this to get too hot.
The trick with this kind of distillation is to use heat to release the scent molecules, but at the same time making sure that these delicate substances aren't destroyed in the process.
You actually use the steam to control the temperature, and the steam will carry those smells over. You can see the liquid coming up, condensing in the long tube. And there is already liquid coming over.
Through, yeah.
And that should be carrying with it some of the sort of rose water smell.
Yes, you can really smell it.
This picture shows a 14th century perfume distillery. Middle Eastern perfumes were known to have been sold as far away as India and China. The Islamic chemists also played a pivotal role in another more gruesome industry: weaponry. Historical records during the Crusades talk in terrified tones of how the Muslims would attack the Christians with burning missiles and grenades, striking fear into the hearts of the defenders. Many of these use a substance known as Greek fire. Islamic chemists improved on Greek fire by using and refining a naturally occurring resource: petroleum. They developed the idea of distilling petroleum, or naft, to create a lighter, extremely flammable oil, which they mixed with other volatile chemicals to make them burn furiously. And the result was clearly terrifying. What all these medieval Islamic texts on chemistry have in common is their great attention to detail, which is clearly based on careful experimentation. In fact, the whole idea of a laboratory where chemical and industrial processes can be tried out really takes hold at this time. The ingenuity of medieval Islamic chemists is impressive. But I wanted to know something deeper. What contribution did they make to our modern understanding of the principles behind chemistry? This is the centerpiece of modern chemistry, the periodic table. It lists all the known elements. Its key idea is to group substances with similar properties together. On the far right, for instance, are the inert gases. On the far left are the volatile metals. The periodic table is a triumph of classification, giving scientists a way of organizing their knowledge of the material world.
Classification is simply a way to think clearly. I mean, what you need when you have some ideas about how the world works is that gives you a kind of schema, and you chop the world up into categories. And that actually helps you to understand, to make sense of what's around you.
People have been trying to classify the material world since ancient times. The Greeks, for instance, thought there were just 4 worldly elements: air, earth, fire, and water. But this idea was a philosophical one and had little practical value. And that's what medieval Islamic chemists really changed. They used experimental observations to classify the stuff the world is made of. At the forefront of this was a medieval Islamic doctor and chemist called Ibn Zakaria al-Razi, who was born here in the city of Ray, just outside the Iranian capital Tehran, in 865 AD. Al-Razi's classification was very different from the Greek one. He argued, for instance, that minerals, roughly stuff we dig out of the ground, should be classified into 6 groups, depending on their observed chemical properties. The same guiding principle that lies behind the modern periodic table.
Now, what I've done is I've brought materials from his classification scheme. And we have here what he called the spirits. We have the metallic bodies, we have the stones, then we have the atriments, the salts, and finally the boraxes.
Each of Al-Razi's groups had a profoundly different experimental behavior. For instance, spirits were flammable. The metals were shiny and malleable. Salts dissolved in water. Of course, these classifications are not the way we do it today. But the point is that for the first time, Al-Razi was grouping substances on the basis of experimental observations, not philosophical musings. We've come over 1,000 years since the work of Al-Razi. What sort of debt does modern chemistry owe to him for his classification?
Well, I think with Razi we start to see the first classification which really leads on to further experiments, the first schema which allows people to start doing rational work. And so really he lies at the start of almost formal chemistry, which ultimately leads to our periodic table.
I believe that what we see in the work of the Islamic chemists and alchemists is the first tentative steps to a new science. Yes, by our standards, it contained a lot of magic and mumbo-jumbo, but it placed an emphasis on experimentation that was truly revolutionary. But bigger and better was to come, because Islamic mathematics and the experimental techniques of Jabir ibn Hayyan and Al-Razi were about to be welded together in a completely innovative way that would revolutionize their work and create the modern scientific age.